Hey guys, this is miicrow here. I wanted to talk about a stealth buff to Lifestaff that happened recently when the anointed passive of Sacred was moved to be only applying to non-consumable heals. It actually inadvertently buffed the Lifestaff, even though you would think that would be a nerf. You would think that, hey, if I'm not being healed by my consumes, I can't run out of my Sacred anymore. Pop a consume's going to heal me for a significant amount more, that would be a direct nerf. But the way that this was coded and the bucket that it was put into effectively makes it like the same sort of effect that Ankh is, except it's twice as powerful as Ankh, and that has resulted in the Lifestaff just generally healing more. And I wanted to talk about specifics of that today. That got changed within the Season 4 Round 2 patch, so it was like the most recent one. No one really talked about it. I don't think a lot of people realize this happened. We realized this happened, I just haven't been able to make a video about it because I've been busy and I wanted to do the math for it. So kind of hopping into that here, I'm going to be going over the math at a little bit of a higher level than I normally go over, but the main thing you need to know about the Lifestaff is there's a bunch of different conditionals that apply, and the more of these conditionals that apply, the more that scaling is going to be swinging like super drastically. For these stats I did down here, I said that we'll start off at a base of like 1,000 heals, and you just see like people healing for nearly like 3.5 to 4 times more. In terms of like the best case scenario, with the old change, you're able to heal for 426% more than the actual original value. And then like with the new change, it's like around 400%. So effectively, it's about a 7% buff to healing itself from a best case scenario. This gets interesting though when we talk about disease, because disease is more prevalent than it used to be, and disease introduces a lot of different factors. So if we include random disease here, which I won't go into the code right away, you can see that you're effectively going to be healing more with the new version of Lifestaff compared to the old version of Lifestaff. From a player that's being healed from a Lifestaff, you're also going to be getting healed for more. And from someone that is not in the Sacred, there's effectively no difference. It's just the main thing to note here is if you're in a Sacred, you're getting healed for a significant amount more than if you're not in a Sacred. Down here, I have like the actual kind of math and specifics for it. It's just that these graphs kind of look prettier with the randomness. The actual change that you're going to be seeing here from a normalized perspective. So this is like a non-normalized. So I started with 1,000, right? You could see that people are getting healed for 2 to 3 times as much as the original value was, which is like how that swinginess kind of comes into perspective. You're generally getting healed for a significant amount more. And it's why some of these bonuses are super important from a Lifestaff player. Like you have to be in light, because if you're missing out on that bonus here, you're missing out on a very significant amount of healing that's outcoming. From a normalized perspective, there are some interesting things that we can pick up from this. If you're not in a Sacred versus if you are in a Sacred, you're getting healed for about 25% more in the old patch versus now you're getting healed for a very significant amount more. You're getting healed for 40% more. So that 25 to 40% is like a very, very significant jump, and it just highlights the importance of players to play in those Sacreds even more than they used to have to. And it's just overall, I think, not a super great change from that perspective, where it's like, hey, really pushing the fact that you need to be playing these Sacreds because you're getting this Ankh-like buff if you're in them, and not just overall is going to be increasing the amount of healing that you're incoming. Also noteworthy, if you have Ankh, you're effectively getting nerfed slightly because of this, but you're still healing for a significant amount more. I calculated all the player changes to include Ankh, and then all the Lifestaff changes to not include Ankh, because Lifestaff players typically don't run it, and players typically run Ankh for every single build. So that's noteworthy as well. I think at some point I'll go into Ankh versus non-Ankh, but not today. Going into some other things that are noteworthy here, if you are a player that is receiving extra heals from the Sacred than you weren't before, you're getting healed for about 11% more, which is pretty significant. So if you should just be playing in Sacred basically no matter what. There's not really a reason not to. If you are a player that is being diseased, like a Lifestaff, versus a player that's not being diseased and you have Ankh, there's a very significant amount of like effective HP that goes on there, right? Like if you're a Lifestaff player, you effectively need to be healing yourself for more than if you are healing an ally. So the way that this kind of comes out into a gameplay is it's very effective to try to disease the Lifestaff player and force pressure onto the Lifestaff player, because the Lifestaff player effectively is going to have a harder time healing themselves than they would to heal an ally, right? So it makes sense from a kind of a player perspective, especially within lore where stuff is more coordinated, or even within OPRs, to try to dive those Lifestaff players early on, put disease on them, because they're not going to be able to heal themselves nearly as well when they're diseased. And the reason for that is because disease now, half that disease is being converted to an outgoing heal bonus reduction. So you're effectively tapping into 2 different buckets. And before here, we started with 5 buckets, right? So if you're effectively reducing 2 of these by putting disease on a Lifestaff player, you're going to be getting a lot more value in terms of the actual heal reduction that's going to be being applied here. So it's like really, really important to be going for those. I think it's also interesting if we look to normalize this around the kind of player perspective versus the Lifestaff perspective and say this is one. If you are being healed like before from a player perspective, you're getting healed for like 30% more on with a sacred, which is a little bit higher than it was with the Lifestaff. But if you are like being healed within a sacred with these new changes, it's almost 40%, but it's not exactly 40%. So you could still see the value of playing in one of those sacreds, and this value I think gets diminished a bit because of how Ankh interacts with things. Ankh effectively is going to be reducing, or it's adding that same bucket, right? So you're getting reduced value of the actual healing that's incoming because you're dealing with the same buckets, which is why it's important to try to distribute what bucket that you're actually putting your kind of damage absorption in. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of these changes. Like that's kind of it from a content perspective. I'll probably go through the math in a little bit of depth here, but not like as much. But it's just like overall, like the main takeaway here is like you need to be playing in your sacred if you're playing with the Lifestaff. If you're not playing with the Lifestaff, you effectively just got nerfed even more. Even though like this change, like in theory, it's like, hey, if you don't play in the sacred, your pots are gonna be even more effective. It sounds like it's gonna be good from a casual like player perspective. But the reality of like this change is it's just like super, super important to be playing in those sacreds. It's just like even more important than it was before. And if you aren't playing in a sacred, you're effectively throwing. You're kind of like missing out on those like Ankh and the new Ankh, which is twice as powerful as Ankh actually is in the form of Sacred Ground, which is just like kind of ridiculous in my opinion. But getting into like the math here and how I calculated this, I did this for assuming that a player typically has 25% disease. I did a standard deviation and I kind of capped the bounds like it's done in game. That base heal is 1,000, like I've said before. This is like code for actually getting the graphs. The only thing that's like noteworthy here is there's a disease cap in the game. You're only gonna have your heals reduced if you're actually diseased, which makes sense. I only apply this to the healer side of things. The actual player side of things, I didn't apply the outgoing disease for because it doesn't really make sense. And then from a case where if you're going over the cap, this is just like a weird case because of Gaussian distributions, because it can like artificially cap the bounds with a Gaussian distribution because it's normalized around like a certain point. So I had to do that in case you ended up getting killed for more because of a disease, which is just like a weird byproduct of things that you don't really have to worry about too much. That's why you see this like weird spike like near the end. Like there's weird spikes that happen because of that, but like the overall distribution is like accurate, if that makes sense. I just had to set some artificial boundaries for the actual edge cases. That's it for like the randomized code though. The rest of this is basically just graphing. This is pretty self-explanatory. If you use this, like I like this library a lot, like graph objects, just because it lets you zoom in on certain points and actually lets you like highlight points and see like what the data is versus like traditional ones. Like it's just like a little bit harder to see. So I could like zoom in on like these specific points and like compare the values exactly, which is like kind of nice. So that's something I've done for that, and that's what I did for all these. For the actual like means and normalized versions of this, this is using NumPy because there's a mean function. You could technically just do the sum of everything over the length, and then you can get the mean, but this is like a little bit faster. And that's basically it. And then sorting is really easy in Python because there's a sort function. So I just sorted everything as well within this one with the sorted function. It's like super simple. Don't have to deal with a lot of the drama that you do in a lot of other languages. And then from other side of things with the normalized side, I just divided it by the first value because it's sorted, right? So that's like the lowest value. So that's basically it for the code. If you guys want to see the code on GitHub, let me know and I'll throw it up there. But I think it's like pretty self-explanatory. But again, the main thing here is you need to be playing in Sacred Grounds. If you're not playing within Sacred Grounds within PvP or soft throwing, it also applies to PvE. Like playing in Sacreds is like super, super important. Like that kind of communication aspect of like maybe you need to have your tank in like one edge of the Sacred and the rest of your team in the other edge. It's just like a good way to kind of increase your survivability as a whole. And then the other like weird kind of rant thing I talk about is like, look how many buffs Lifestaff has that like affects healing. Like, oh my god, it's like kind of ridiculous. I think some of these need to be like tuned a bit so it's a little bit more self-explanatory from a newer player perspective. It's like you need to have Protector Strength, which is like this passive that like Lifestaff has. It gives like a 20% boost You need to have Blessed on everything, which is a mandatory perk, which kind of sucks because then you can't be super creative. You need to have a certain amount of, well, the focus is like self-explanatory. Oh yeah, there's another thing here with the diamonds. I looked from a data mine perspective. I don't know if I still have it open. No, I don't. Shoot. But from running a rune glass diamond, for some reason it still gives the same amount of healing bonus, that 15%, but the damage scales at 12%, even though the description says it will scale at 12% for both. So that one's kind of funny. But I'll kind of show you guys what I mean from like looking at like one of these rune glasses. But where it says here that it says 12% damage and outgoing healing while at full health, it from the code perspective it says 12% damage, but it's 15% outgoing healing when I actually look at it from the data mine perspective using what do you call it, New World Buddy. So that one's kind of weird. Maybe I could pull that up here. That might be like kind of worth a side note so the devs know what they're doing potentially if they've watched some of these videos to fix that stuff, which I don't think they do, but it'd be cool if they did. So if I like look one of these up here, and then we look for the healing bonus, which is a little bit harder to find. Is it this? No. You have to, like, there's so many parts of the rune glass that it's like kind of annoying to find this. No, that's not it. Maybe I'll look under effects. I'm just clicking through everything that pops up. Nope, there it is. So the rune glass just wild add thing for some reason. It says base damage is 12%, but heal scaling value is 15. That should be 12 there. It shouldn't be 15. And that applies to every single rune glass. So everything is healing at 15%, even with the T4 rune glass, which disagrees with what the perk description says. So either the perk description needs to be updated or this needs to be updated one way or the other. But if you're a Lifestaff player right now, at least, you should probably be using a rune glass gem because it's only a benefit, since it will allow you to get more ult charge or have some other effect because you don't really care about your damage that's outgoing. I guess unless you use the new artifact Lifestaff, in which case I don't know why you're trying to use that for DPS, but you can do your own thing. But with that being said, let me know if you guys have any like comments, questions, or concerns about any of this, and I'll see you in the next video.